The most famous giant in history is Goliath from the Bible. He was a champion from the Philistine camp who fought as an armored warrior. Standing over 9 feet tall, Goliath was an immense man, considering the length of his arms. He wore a bronze helmet, a coat of scale armor weighing over 125 pounds, bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin. His spear was like a weaver's beam, and its head weighed about 15 pounds. A shield-bearer went ahead of him. Goliath was dressed in chainmail, and the Philistines wore a large piece of cloth similar to a tarp with bronze rings overlaid from the shoulder to the knee. This armor provided protection against the enemy's sharp and deadly weapons. In addition to his personal armor, Goliath had another man running ahead of him, carrying a shield as big as a person, providing him with extra defense. Imagine facing such a giant clad in heavy armor. Anyone would be at a great disadvantage trying to challenge him in combat. Goliath positioned himself and showed this to the ranks of Israel, telling them, "Why have you come to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and servers." Goliath proposed a popular strategy in Eastern civilization, representative combat, or a one-on-one conflict. He represented the Philistine forces, and whoever Israel chose would represent the Israeli forces. The outcome was simple. The side whose champion won would be declared the victor, while the army of the other would face total defeat. There was no need to bring all your soldiers to this battle. Just choose one warrior to face me, and I will fight him. I am the champion. I am unmatched. Goliath not only issued this challenge and disappeared, he persisted with his challenge for 40 long days. The Philistine Goliath would come out morning and evening and position himself for 40 days. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Judah near Bethlehem, a young man named David was tending to his father's sheep. He was too young to join the army. In fact, David was probably unaware of the conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines at that time. His only concern was that 3 of his older brothers were serving in Saul's army. David's father was worried about his 3 eldest sons. Jesse was getting older and probably wouldn't be able to make the journey through the mountains on his own. So he called his youngest son and told him, "David, I need you to do a task for me. Take this roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers and hurry to their camp. Also, take these 10 cuts of cheese to the unit commander. See how your brothers are doing and bring back news of them." So David got up early in the morning, left the flock with a keeper, took the supplies, and went as Jesse had instructed. He arrived at the camp as the army was moving out in battle formation, shouting the war cry. As he approached the edges of the Israeli camp, he noticed the troops preparing for battle and heard the war cry. He simply wanted to observe and see what was happening. Then David ran to the front line to greet his brothers, leaving his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper. Afterward, David left his supplies with the supply keeper and rushed to the ranks, greeted his brothers, and while he was talking to them, there came the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, speaking the same words again. Imagine the following scenario. While standing there with his 3 brothers, David hears a loud shout from across the valley, and instantly everyone around him starts running back and hiding inside their tents. When the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. Keep in mind that David had never seen or heard of this giant from Gath's challenge. As he looked out over the battlefield, he saw a giant man covered in armor, shouting threats and challenging and cursing the God of Israel. And David was enraged by this. Remember, this is the 41st day the Israelites have been facing Goliath, but it is the first time David is encountering this. Then David spoke to the men who were with him. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes the disgrace of his insult from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he has insulted and challenged the armies of the living God? The men told him what would be done for the man who killed him. David then had a meeting with King Saul. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are only a youth, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant kept his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose against me, I seized it by its beard, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has insulted and challenged the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own garments, put a bronze helmet on his head, and put a coat of mail on him. Then David strapped his sword over his armor and tried to walk, but he could not, for he was not used to them. And David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I am not accustomed to them." Then David took them off, took his shepherd's staff in hand, and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in his shepherd's bag that is in his pouch with his sling in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Now we come to a pivotal moment. The Philistine came forward and approached David with his shield-bearer in front. When the Philistine looked around and saw David, he ridiculed and despised him because he was just a youth, rugged and handsome. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And he cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied this day. The Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the corpses of the Philistine army to the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." Think about what could happen. David, courageous and firm in front of a towering giant, had only a simple sling and a single stone to confront a giant clad in armor weighing as much as 220 pounds. When the Philistine advanced to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. David reached into his pouch, took out a stone, and slung it, striking the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and without a sword in his hand. He ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword from its sheath and killed him, cutting off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their mighty champion was dead, they fled. The Philistines did not return after this, realizing their champion was no longer alive. They dispersed. The men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of the valley and the gates of Ekron. The fatally wounded Philistines fell along the way to Shahim, even unto Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camp. Then David brought the head of the Philistine to Jerusalem. He took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. The biblical story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known from the Bible, showcasing a lesson in courage, faith, and overcoming the seemingly impossible. Was Goliath a Nephilim? Some scholars believe that Goliath, the Gittite, a resident of Gath, belonged to a race known as the Nephilim. Other experts argue that Goliath was a reem, as the Nephilim were destroyed in the Great Flood during Noah's time. The Reem are mentioned nearly 20 times in the Bible. For example, only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants known as kings. His bedstead was an iron structure 9 cubits long, 12 feet, and 4 cubits wide, 6 feet by the standard cubit from forearm to the end of the middle finger. Thus, we took possession of this land at that time. I gave the territory from Aroer, which is by the valley of Arnon, along with half of the mountain region of Gilead and its cities, to the Reubenites and the Gadites. The rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh, that is, the whole region of Argob. As for all of Bashan, it is called the land of the Reem. Many experts think that the Philistines came from a group known as the Anakim. The idea that Goliath was an elite warrior is reinforced because Gath, where he was from, used to be a major Anakim center. Some researchers suggest that Goliath's family background could be traced in a way that indicates a genetic pattern known as autosomal dominant inheritance. This genetic pattern can lead to conditions that make individuals extremely tall, such as familial acromegaly or gigantism. In the biblical narratives, Goliath was a massive man related to Goliath. After the fall of his legendary brother, we find Goliath's 4 brothers. There was again war with the Philistines at Gob and Gob. Anan, the son of Jair the Bethlehemite, killed the Gittite Goliath, whose spear shaft was like a weaver's beam. During Bible times, there was an object known as a weaver's beam, a strong cylindrical piece of wood that sat at the top of a loom to hold the vertical threads called the warp. The purpose of this weaver's beam was to keep these warp threads separated and allow them to be wound as the fabric was woven. By keeping the warp threads stretched and organized, the weaver could then shuttle the horizontal threads, known as the weft, back and forth through the warp threads. When the Bible speaks of a weaver's beam, it is really emphasizing how thick and sturdy this beam was rather than its length. It is used to highlight the contrast with the more common and thinner spears that a typical person might use. In the Bible, there are exactly 4 verses that mention a weaver's beam or spear, and 2 of these instances are in reference to Goliath's spear. This narrative of Israel triumphing over the Philistines shows that Israel could conquer great enemies even without David's presence. These courageous individuals achieved notable feats. Once David had ceased battling giants, as the leaders of one generation fade, God ensures that new leaders arise to guide the next generation. The legendary victory over Goliath likely fueled stories of David's adversarial role in the Philistine fields. David was undoubtedly a constant source of annoyance to them. While Lami sought to dominate David, Lami's fate ultimately mirrored that of his brother. But remember, Lami was not just clashing with anyone, he was facing someone who had the support of God. Although we hear little about Lami, his account confirms to the Israelites that their true power did not come from their numbers or weapons, but from their God. The Bible mentions an unnamed giant only in one other place. But again, there was war in Gath, where there was a man of great stature with 24 digits, 6 fingers on each hand, and 6 toes on each foot. And he was also descended from the giants. This time the unnamed giant found himself facing one of David's mighty men, a soldier named Jonathan, son of Shimea, David's brother. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shimea, David's brother, killed him. These descended from the giants in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Although the Bible does not directly name him, it teaches us a powerful lesson through his story, a lesson about humility, acquired strength that even the most powerful giants could not comprehend. The text presents these 4 individuals as Reem. To further clarify these connections, the scriptures note that the Anakim were considered part of the Reem. This makes sense, since Goliath and his relatives are associated with both the Anakim and the Reem. They were defeated by David and his mighty men, despite being large and strong fighters. The battle against the giants reaffirmed the Israelites' faith, for the battle is the Lord's, as David declared before defeating Goliath. Thus, Goliath's brothers became part of a larger narrative, not just as defeated enemies, but as eternal reminders that even giants fall when they oppose God's will. Giants in the Bible are often portrayed as enemies of God's people and are eventually defeated.